It's good to have you all again. It's welcome to the Right Way Business Broadcast podcast that we normally host on a regular basis, and it's good to have you. I've been around for quite a time, so it's really crazy. I don't know about you, things are super busy. Anyway, it's great to have you. As you can see on the screen, I've got to Neil Osmond, who's going to be the guest chair today. And I just wanted to really just to introduce him in a little while. But before that, just go through the sort of proceedings in terms of what we're looking to achieve today. And really this whole element is really trying to understand the business journey that happens, when you'll take that step of being an entrepreneur. And hopefully Neil will share some anecdotes in relation to what that looks like in terms of how to start, issues and successes and joys in relation to the journey, but also what happens at the end as well. If you had the opportunity to exit, not many people had the opportunity to exit, but Neil will be able to share a little bit about his journey to exiting the business as well. So we're going to be talking a little about that. There's going to be some introductions, of course, sharing a little bit about Neil, discussions and some Q&A. And hopefully that as we go through, if there's anything that you want to share, then happy for you to do that going forward as well on that. So enough of that, but back to Neil. It's good to have you, Neil. Hope you're well.
I am. Thank you. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
No, that's all right. It's been a pleasure anyway. So Neil describes himself as just loving the challenge of solving real world healthcare problems using technology. And so that gift was manifesting, helping his dream, a little about the art of the possible with technology, and while helping clients balance that solution, which are affordable, practical, and desirable to users. And I call him a true techie nerd. He is a true techie nerd anyway, and he claims to be equally passionate about the little things. That button should never be there. To the big things. How can we truly disrupt this market? And his background has come from within healthcare, GSK, AstraZeneca, MSD, and obviously some management consultancy thrown in around that as well. And through an idea with a friend, he's created the company called Earthware, which is focused on solving problems for patients and healthcare professionals. They didn't get involved with other sectors, and I think one big pride was him and his team, creating the online mapping for the London 2012 website and maps for Transport for London's journey planner. So Earthware has grown with the values of its founders core to about 20 plus people, aiming to solve real world problems with imagination, thoughtless delivery, and working together with the clients as one team. And I think that sort of culture element we want to explore as well, because many of you know, my musings, culture is a real big element in terms of business success. He's married with 3 children. I think it's 3 children. Is that right, Neil?
That's right.
Yeah. 3, yeah. Very much a family man, but finds time to be active in his community through his local church. So I hope that sums you up a little bit, Neil, in that respect. So, but anyway, how are you anyway? How's things going?
Well, they're going well. I must have done intros 100 times, and what I really should have done is outsourced them to you. Now I've heard that. It's a bit late for doing that, but yeah, I'm well.
Checking the post afterwards. Checking the post, man. Anyway, so really, it's just, I say it's a conversation. Obviously, I'm going to share some of the stuff that obviously, hopefully, is of relevance and adds value to the conversation. But and again, a lot of it is centered around your journey as an entrepreneur and what made you take that step. Like I said, you've got that big employee connection, and obviously, I appreciate circumstances to create us, but take a step back. Did you always want to be an entrepreneur, or was it sort of you fell into it? Tell me how it happened.
Yeah, I'm not yet convinced I ever was an entrepreneur, if I'm being honest. Entrepreneurs are always these magical beasts, these people that created something out of nothing, and the Richard Bransons of the world, and I'm not sure that was ever quite what I wanted to do. I think when I had lots of jobs in pharmaceuticals, I always had a bit of an itch, but my itch was much more around, could I create an organization that ran on a set of values that I thought were important and maybe a little bit different from what I'd experienced. Though, to be fair, I'd worked for some fantastic organizations with really good cultures, but just something a little different. And that was my challenge. That was the thing I wanted to know. And so that's really where my itch came from. It was never, ever about money or anything like that. And so the interesting thing is how your mindset has to change as you go through the entrepreneur journey if you want to get to an exit.
So in terms of, that sort of step, where were you before? And I just want to just really unpack also the thinking process in terms of making that leap. The reason for that is that some people say, oh yeah, and well, taking a step back even further, we've got all this narrative that everybody can be a non-entrepreneur. You look at social media and people saying, well, ditch school, ditch university, become an entrepreneur, which I think is a nonsense anyway, but that's another matter. But the point is that there's a massive pressure on these generations now to become an entrepreneur, to chart your own destiny and all these lovely things around that. It's not as easy as that. And I think really just tell me the situation, which I said, okay, all right, obviously you talk with your friend or whatever, tell me a little bit about that dynamic and our thinking process in terms of saying, okay, I'm going to make the jump.
Yeah, I think really my story was about a sliding doors moment. I don't know if that reference is still valid. The film's probably 25 years old now, but that moment happened to me when my computer went bang. And I might be techie, but I'm not techie enough to resurrect a hard drive. So I rang my best buddy, Brian, who I knew through our church, but I'd never worked with him. And it was in the old days when I rang him on his home phone, for those of you who remember that, and said, well, you're clearly at home because you picked up. Is there any chance I can bring my computer to you? Because it's gone bang and I haven't backed it up for the last 3 months and I really need some of that stuff. So he was gracious enough to say, yeah, bring it over. And the real story was that while he was resurrecting my hard drive, which took some time, he said, are you interested in seeing something I've been playing around with in my spare time? The truth was, Wayne, and I've only admitted this to Brian 4 years afterwards, I think it was, that I wasn't really that interested, but he's fixing my computer. So what do you say? You say, yes, absolutely. And so he showed me that he'd screen scraped a website with all the show times and all the cinema addresses in the UK. And he plotted them on this thing called Google Earth. I'd never seen Google Earth before. It was really early. And suddenly in about 20 seconds, I could answer a question that was important to me, whereas it was previously take me 10 minutes on 3 different websites, because that was back in the days pre-broadband. It was dial-up for those.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was brilliant. I want to go and see Batman. It's on at 7:30 in this cinema up the road, and 8 o'clock in that one, and 8:30 in that one. Okay, well, I know where I'm going now. This is great. So I said to Brian, I said, are you going to sell this? And Brian said, no, I'm not into all that. And I thought, I reckon I could sell this. Now, back then, that sounds great when you've exited, but back then I had no experience of sales, no experience of mapping, no experience of digital, a young family, unbeknownst to me, another one on the way. The circumstances were not great for me to do this. And so we needed to make sure that if Brian and I were going to do this, it wasn't going to damage our careers too badly or leave us destitute. So we actually took us a year from that moment to deciding that we were going to go for it. And a number of things had to change. And during that year, they did. But it goes back to what you said, which is, yes, an idea is really important. You need to know what you think you can do. But it really is 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. It really is. And so, and you can make some really, really healthy businesses out of some quite boring ideas. And you see a lot of really clever failures. And I think it really is about just committing to it and making sure you're passionate about it, but you've also done the thinking as well. And then when you're ready, going for it.
And did you, were you still working? You're both working in full-time employment at the time, over that year that you're taking to create this new business?
Yeah, so a couple of the things that needed to be true, because it wasn't really ever our plan that I would give up work, because you don't need a full-time CEO when there's two of you, and I couldn't code. So the idea was to get Brian to the point where he could be released at least part-time to go and work on what was our first product, which was a mapping product for estate agents. And a couple of things happened. One, which was the business he was working for sold. So he had a lot of legacy with the previous owner, wouldn't want to let her down. But suddenly they had new owners, and a friend of him from a former, from formerly what he used to work with, rang him up and said, "You wouldn't be interested in doing a contract, would you?" And those two things allowed him to be released to do a 3-day-a-week contract and work 2 days a week for Earthware. And then the plan was that I would just kind of work in my spare time to do the admin, the operations, and everything else like that. But as it happened, as there are in many big companies, there was a round of redundancies, and I managed to find my way onto the redundancy list and left with enough money that I could work for a little while for nothing until we could get the business big enough that it sustained both of us. And that probably took another year. But one of the things I tried really hard to do is not to be a drag on the payroll. So I used to sell my time on a daily rate, probably for the first 14 years of Earthware. I would actually do consultancy as well as run the business.
Oh, really? So wow. I didn't realize that. Okay.
It enabled us to grow. If you don't have a lot of overhead, then it enables you to grow quicker because you can hire people quicker. So I know some people would say, well, you need 100% focus, but it worked for us. And it worked for us that I would be doing 2 or 3 days a week working for another organization. And at the same time, I would do my best to run Earthware.
I think that's an important principle. People don't appreciate, and I don't know, we can probably unpack this, but I remember when I first made the sort of jump as well, and a similar situation to you, I exited the company, I offered them £3 million for the business. The owner said no, and I knew by then the relationship had gone. So within 6 months I was gone. But during that period of time, I really knew I wanted to do something. I knew I could make a difference. And on the back of that, I spent a year, and people know you around, and they do your sort of consultancies type stuff as well. But it was really just sitting down with my wife, and I think that's the mistake I probably didn't made. Really helped us understand the journey, because obviously, clearly, from a salaried, money coming in every month religiously to lumpy, and the first year was good. I made probably more money than in the employment, but after that, it was like okay. How do I manage cash flow? How do I manage, obviously, paying taxes for myself? And I fall into that trap as well, and all that type of stuff. And people don't appreciate that. The day-to-day running gets disrupted. But if you're not communicating with your wife, your partner, whoever, around, the journey and what you're expecting to achieve, it's a bumpy road. That first few years are really bumpy. So how did you navigate that with the missus?
So I have an amazing wife. I mean, she's just incredibly supportive. And when I mentioned that sliding doors moment, if I'd have come home after that idea and put it out in front of her and said, I'd really like to give this a go, and if she'd have said on that day, no, that would be too stressful for me, and I don't think you should be doing that, it's too risky for us as a family, there would be no Earthware. I'd not be sitting here talking to you. I wouldn't visit the business. And so it's really important to stress how your family go on the journey with you.
Yeah.
We're rushing forward. I'm sure we'll get there. But there were very few people who knew that we were starting to go through a process. Very few. Only it was really limited just to shareholders that knew that we were starting to look at a process.
Yeah.
But it also was my family, because when you come to the point of selling a business, you're almost doing two jobs. One that's very private, you can't show, and you've still got to do your day job. And I had to engage them and say, for the next year, you're not going to see me very much. I have to do two jobs, and I can't tell anybody else what I'm doing. So you need an incredibly understanding family. So you always recognize you're not on the journey alone. You're on the journey together. And if at any point Caroline, my wife, had felt that this was too much and it was making too many sacrifices of the family, then it would have been very difficult to continue. But she was 100% supportive from day one till today.
No, 100%, 100%. And like I said before, yeah, as entrepreneurs, the pressures are so great. The last thing you want is pressures at home. You want to come home to peace. You want to come home to more turmoil, and really ensuring that somebody's there backing you and supporting you and picking you up when you've had a bad day or client hasn't paid you and that's payroll's due tomorrow. All that type of stuff is super important as well. When did you realize during this that you had a business and not a job?
So I think the truth is, day one, really. It's a really interesting question because I'm not sure how much creative, ambitious people, I don't think, are the kind of people that refer to what they do as a job very often anyway. Even when I was on the payroll of a large corporation, if my job wasn't my passion, then I didn't, my CV really looks like a CV of somebody who gets bored easily, and it's true, I get bored easily. So if I wasn't passionate about it, I'd try and find something else to do. So I think it was a natural change to, yes, I was on a payroll, not for the first few months though, but I was on a payroll at my own organization, though some entrepreneurs own 100%. I never did, never owned more than half of it. So it was always doing it as a shareholder, but also as an executor. And so when you start your business, I think there's a really good book called The E-Myth, which if anybody reads, I think it's The E-Myth Revisited. And it talks about in the early days, you're really three roles. You're a technician and you're a manager and you're an entrepreneur. And so you're not really ever doing one role. You're actually doing a bunch of different roles. And at any given time, you've got to take one hat off and put another hat on and concentrate on that role for a little bit. So, I guess that became very clear very soon that this wasn't employment anymore. It was a very different way of working. Yeah,
sure. And who was your first hire?
Well, Brian, I guess, because he's my co-founder and partner. But first hire didn't actually work out very well. It's quite a good story. We decided we were building a mapping product for estate agencies, but Google Earth had this amazing functionality where you could build 3D buildings into a map.
Yeah.
We were pretty innovative from the start. If we weren't innovating, it didn't feel like we were doing our job properly. So we invested and hired a couple of people to create these 3D maps where you could build. We tried to sell them to developers to show what a housing development would look like on the map. You could literally go and look exactly where it is before it's built. And we thought they were really cool. And they were really cool, but we couldn't find anyone to buy them. So it happened. We probably, in the time I ran Earth, we probably launched maybe 14 different products, something like that, 15 maybe.
Wow.
I reckon only 5 of them.
Yeah, there you go.
In some way. So you have some failures, and that's the cost of doing business, really. And that was one of them. So our first couple of hires, in the end, we ran it for a year, and we just couldn't sustain the investment anymore. And so they exited the organisation, which is a shame. So.
That's quite interesting element, in fact, you're saying, because obviously you had those 15 products. Do you feel that at that time, that element of focus in terms of you weren't quite sure what the sweet spot was, what the customer sector you should be in, or whatever it is, that you're sort of finding your way? Do you felt that sort of period was not grope in the dark, but really just trying to understand yourself as a business? What do we solve really, really well?
Well, Brian and I always talk about earth webbing in 3 phases, and one of the things my team, I'm sure, would criticize me for over the years with good reason, is a lack of focus, or maybe they'd be unkind and say I'm a bit like a magpie. I like pecking at shiny things. And so really the 3 phases, the first phase was, we don't know what we're doing here. We have to try and create something from nothing, and we're flailing in the dark, and some things work and some things don't work. But eventually you build, maybe up to a team of 4, 6 people, and you get repeat business and you're getting known for something. And we started to land clients. So we were starting in 2007. So 2011, we won we won the business for the Olympic Games 2012.
Yeah.
We won for all the mapping for the journey planner for Transport for London. Brilliant clients, both of them. Absolutely brilliant to be able.
What was it like? I mean, crumbs. I mean, I'm sure there must have been hundreds of people who pitched for it. You know, was it one of these things that you saw an advert or somebody tapped you on the shoulder? How did it work?
So Locog's really the good one, because we got to know a load of people at Microsoft who worked, because we started as a mapping company. So phase one, we were a mapping company, really,
Sure.
Interactive mapping, but there aren't that many of those at the time. But we were becoming well known at Microsoft, and for some reason Microsoft became aware there was this big project to do, and they rang us and they said, we'd like to push you forward. And so here we were, this tiny little mapping company in a provincial town in 40 miles north of London, and they pushed us forward. And with that credibility, we were up against some really big names. I probably shouldn't say the army because I've gotten it wrong, but really big names that were doing lots of other projects for Locog. And I'm not sure I did the right thing, but I happened to be on holiday at the pitch in France, and I offered to come back. And my team, and this is a really good learning, my team said, no, we got this. It's the biggest thing we'd ever gone for by a mile.
Whoa.
And my guys said, yeah, we've got this, we don't need you. And so they pitched and they won. And when I eventually got to talk to, there was about 15 people in the room. I wasn't there, so I'm retelling the story. But when I got to eventually talk to the project manager, the reason he chose us was the reason we thought we were probably weakest, which is he didn't want a big, massive multinational who this is just another project for. He wanted an organization who would stop at nothing to make this successful, who would build their reputation on this project. He wanted to know they'd pick up the phone at 3 a.m. if you rang them. And so he saw the things that I saw as making us weak. He saw them as strengths, that we're small and nimble and really cared. And it was a large part of our business for a little while.
And you delivered.
Sometimes you need a really good client. That's what you really need. And he was an excellent client, and Locog were an excellent client. They really were. And so there were, if anybody remembers, this guy called Alex Balfour, who ran their entire digital operations, amazing guy. And he wrote me a handwritten note afterwards, really classy, on a big picture of the Olympic Stadium, and saying, I'm sure he might have said this to every supplier, but to our best and most loyal supplier or something like that. And to me, I remembered that because he didn't need to do that. That was really classy.
No, totally. No, that's just gold dust, absolute gold dust. And the fact that, Microsoft introduced you, I mean, it says a lot, doesn't it, really? You've got a massive multi-billion pound business saying, okay, this little company down the road, from you, can do work just as well. So fantastic. I really, really like that little anecdote there. So did you use that business as a platform to grow? I mean, did you find that that was a sort of catalyst? You talk about the 3 phases of growth in terms of your business. Was that the sort of launch of the second phase for you, type of thing?
So we realized that the mapping part of our business was never going to allow us to grow much bigger than we were. Maybe 10, 12 people, maybe, $1 million or 2 in revenue, but it was such a small market and quite difficult to find the decision makers. So with everything I'd learned in the first 4 or 5 years, I realized I now knew a lot to try and help in my former sector. So I hadn't really touched pharmaceuticals in the first 4 years. We didn't really have clients, but now I was pretty confident we were very good at what we did. We pivoted into healthcare. So the next phase was a lot more about pivoting into healthcare and winning lots of clients, doing really interesting work. But we were really most focused on things that would be used by patients and healthcare professionals. So a lot of our work was commissioned by pharmaceutical companies, but was used by patients and healthcare professionals. As a little aside, my wife is actually a nurse, so it's quite easy to imagine a world and challenge us to say this really won't work. This is too complicated. It doesn't make any sense. You can't expect people to log in on 3 different platforms. They've got 2 minutes between appointments. So we really became known, I guess, for innovation and for solutions that get used in the real world. We're in healthcare. So that was kind of phase 2. And once we got to there, phase 3, which I'm sure we'll probably come on to talk about, was when we realized that Brian and I were running a really big lifestyle business. And nobody buys lifestyle businesses, really. So what we really need to do is work out what is the business that could outlast us. At that point in time, we weren't thinking about selling or exiting, but we realized if we ever wanted to step away, it needed to have momentum of its own and vision of its own and people that really believed in it, and we could walk away and it would continue to grow and succeed. So phase 3 was about what we needed to do to make that happen.
No, perfect, and we'll come on to that part as well, because again, I think that was one of my earlier questions. When you realise that, I mean, that is when you have a business, like you said, when you pivot from the sort of lifestyle elements of the the 2 holidays and the stable business, blah blah blah, but ultimately, really, you still need it in the business, and how can you extricate yourself, from that. I think, to be fair, you did a good job. The fact that your team pitch, I mean, I would be coming back on the plane. I'm saying to my wife, sorry, and the kids, sorry, I'm coming back to the pitch, But to have that fortitude to be able to do that and to believe in your team, that's incredible. So that pivots quite nicely onto this subject of culture, because ultimately you created something which ultimately you are able to trust in wherever you're away, trust people to get things done, and that's always a hard thing as an entrepreneur. You start with, like you said, you're doing operations, you're doing finance, you're doing marketing, you're doing the sales, you're doing everything, making the tea, coffee, and all the rest, and cleaning up the office. And then having to come to a business where you're having to abdicate, inverted commas, responsibility, but also delegate to other people. And I'm hoping that when you delegate stuff gets done. And that's the hard part as well. So tell me about that culture journey and what you're trying to infuse as well. And I appreciate it's not only about operational, but it's also about mindset and the spiritual climate, for want of a better word, that you're trying to foster in the organization to create a culture and values which allowed you guys to have an identity, which obviously clearly the guy at the project management recognized. And also people, hiring new hires, wherever it is, coming on board would really understand.
Yeah, I always think the interesting thing when you're in the position of having exited a business is you can tell your stories looking backwards.
Of course.
So, and you can tell them in such a way of, look at what we did, it was great. What you don't say is the journey or that you took to get there, which was rocky and you made loads of mistakes and things like that.
100%.
Reminds me of somebody once asked me what's the best thing about running your own business? And I said, it's the same as the worst thing about running your own business. Every morning you get up and no one tells you what to do. But if you don't know what to do, there's no one there to tell you. There really isn't. It's quite a lonely thing to do. And if you're smart, you gather around you some really good advisors at the end. We had proper, non-executives, they were unbelievably good. But even on the way, I had friends who were in similar situations, and we would go and grab coffee and say, have you ever dealt with this? I don't know. And one of the things we arrived late to, I think, was understanding, having the confidence to run the business on a set of values that then drove the culture. Yes, we had an informal culture. We wanted to be a great place to work, and we hired fun, interesting people, and we all had a good time. We had a football table like everybody else who was in tech and all that kind of stuff. But probably around year 9-ish, we realized that this wasn't enough. In fact, I was getting personally frustrated about a culture of, I called it a culture of optionality, that everybody who worked for us felt they had a view on what Earthware should be and was disappointed when it wasn't the view in the mold they wanted it to be. And I felt very much like I had to justify any decision that wasn't in line with every single employee. Really, I once did, during our lockdown was a horrible time to lead any organization. I'm sure it was difficult. But I remember doing a kind of team meeting, and I talking a little bit about productivity. And afterwards, I got 2 notes on Teams, one saying how terrible they thought it'd been and how disrespectful, and they've never felt more like a number. And because we have values, one of our values was honestly open, so anybody could say anything to me, and that was fine. And another one saying, "This is the best I've ever heard you speak. It was fantastic. Everybody needs to hear this message," and that kind of thing. And it was just a lesson in everybody's different. Just everybody's different. You can't please all people all the time. So one of the things that we worked really hard on, and they're still, if you were to be here and able to turn around, they're on the wall behind me because they were so important to us. But we worked really hard to develop a set of values that were very important to us. So often I walk into corporations, I'm sure people have said this before, and you see integrity and performance and, all those kind of things.
There you go. Oh, they live in it. Yeah.
What do they really mean? So we tried to make ours very specific. And if you were able to go and see them, we had lots of words on our website that described what that actually meant. But to us, they were love what you do, because if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. I am team, which was all about we succeed together, we fail together. There is no individuals here. It's not about egos. This is about all of us together. Yeah. Be beyond, which was all about our contribution to the world. So one of the things we did, people pushed us on afterwards and said, well, what about our carbon footprint? So we work with a company called Ecology, and we offset everybody's that work for Earthware's carbon footprint in their personal and their business lives. Yeah. So just as an example of making it live, make it count. This is doing projects that really make a difference in the world, and making sure that whatever we do, we're trying to help the maximum number of patients or healthcare professionals or whoever it is that we're doing, people that are using maps on Journey Planner, to help give them the best experience. And then the final one I've already mentioned, which is honestly open. We tried to get people to not be brutal, but to be really honest. So we did a lot of work around. For those of you who have any familiarity with Agile, you build in retrospectives. So every week we're reflecting on what we've done well as a team, what we haven't done well as a team, what we can do better. And we had things like employee forums where you can bring anybody in the employees elected their own little forum, and anything they wanted to bring, if that forum wanted to bring it to the leadership team, then we couldn't say no. We'd have to look at it and things like that. And so it was trying to build this kind of whole value system. And really what that enables you to then do is then make your big decisions based on your values once you know them. So we hired on values. If we ever had to ask somebody to leave, which is pretty rare, but we do that based on values. The way we handle people was based on the values. We had values awards. So we celebrated people based on their performance, based on how well they showed the values every quarter. We had big awards, we actually put money behind that as well. So it became very clear, if you worked at Earthware, that the values were almost certainly the most important thing we had in our business.
Can you quantify, because obviously, a lot of people will especially if they're starting off with one or two people, really don't really appreciate, and I say we appreciate, because obviously we build businesses around that, the impact, financial impact, profitability impact of that to an organization. Are you able to sort of qualify and quantify that impact to Earthware in relation to the fact that you had those core values and starting to enact them and live them going forward?
Yeah, I think the way I would say it is, in that third phase, we were profitable, but we probably run out. I don't remember. I'm going back 8 years now, but let's say we were 10% margin or something like that. In order to be a better organization, you don't have to always drive revenue. You can just be better. And so at the time we sold, I can't remember the exact numbers, but that certainly was significantly higher than that. And we didn't make people work harder. We just got really smarter at not doing things that not putting unnecessary meetings in their diary, running the business on value so everybody felt appreciated. We did fewer. We weren't inefficient with each other's time. We didn't end up doing rework because we asked the right questions. So you build a lot of this into just the way you work to try and improve performance, but without thinking that means getting people to work more hours, because it might work in the short term, but in the long term, you just lose really good people.
And that's a key thing, really, is that element. People don't appreciate the impact on productivity, ways of working, creativity, on the business. These are really tangible things. Really, if you've got a dysfunctional organisation that is not working together effectively, people are sniping at one another, people working in silos. The impact on the organisation is huge. And like I said, really encourage those who are listening really to understand the impact of good culture, affirmation, allowing people to fail, but also at the same time pick them up and get them going again. It's all those sort of things that are really super important to really building high performance teams going forward. And I say in all the organizations, we've always striven to create leaders who are able to create good people under them. But it has to be a framework under a culture that allows that to happen.
Yeah, and a couple of examples. We adopted Agile probably around year 4. Massive. In the end, I ended up teaching. I developed a course to teach a load of my clients how to use Agile to. It wasn't about productivity, is what this ad to say Agile is about. But to me, it isn't. It's just about really good business practices. It's just not being inefficient with people's time, not getting it wrong the first time, and all kinds of things. So Agile was that. The other one that we adopted later on, maybe in the last few years, was something called the Enterprise Operating System, EOS. And what that really did was brought rigor and accountability to our leadership practices and systems. So we had really good leaders, but we weren't necessarily brilliant at managing ourselves. And if anybody gets to look at that, there's books on that, and you can find that on the internet very easily. But it just brought rigor and discipline where we were perhaps a little bit laid back. Really helped us.
No, good. That's quite interesting sort of segue into a couple of questions around the highs and lows because ultimately, when you're building teams, you're building organizations, trying to create leaders wherever there are low points and as well. So it just gives a couple of anecdotes on the low points, and we'll end up a couple of anecdotes on the high points, but a couple of low points on your journey where you think, okay, is this worth it? How do we pick ourselves up? Whatever it is, what were they for you? If you can recall.
Yeah, they ended up being different through the journey. So one of the low points, probably early on, maybe 18 months after we started the business, was I knew that we could pay this month's salary. I wasn't 100% sure we would have enough money in the bank to pay the following months.
There you go. If you haven't experienced that, folks, you have not got a business. That's all I'm going to say. So take me through the thinking process and dilemma of that.
Revenues, what do they say? Revenues, vanity, profits, sanity, but cash is king. And for the first, 6, 7, 8 years, we really run our business on cash. If you've got the cash in the bank, it's a really good indicator of performance. And what entrepreneurs don't know, and we learn on the journey, is just how expensive growth is. Because in the end, you have to fund growth, and you don't get paid until after you've done it. So the faster you're growing, the more money you need in the bank to be able to hire somebody before you can then use them, and then they use them, and then eventually get paid. And my industry, the great thing about having pharmaceutical companies as clients is they always pay. They're very good, but they often pay late. So you have to be able to
incredible terms, 120 days terms.
Yeah. And I've seen some brilliant businesses just run out of money.
Yeah, there you go.
And they would have been brilliant businesses if they could just have found a way through that. So we were really, really, I think that's a bit of an aside. So, but yeah, it's such an important thing to say. It's just how you've got to be on top of your finances, because it's the thing that will get you while you're growing. But yeah, taking you back to that, it was about 18 months. And it was a really good example about how you get through these, because when it's really difficult, I think leadership teams either come together or divide. They don't carry on the way they've been. Yeah. And I remember being in a pub and saying to, we weren't very big, probably 5 people back then. And just the 4 of us that were a leadership team of 4, it was only a company of about 5 leaders really. And saying what this was. And even the developers said, right, the first thing we're going to do when I get in tomorrow is get on the phone and call all my friends, call the network, see if there's any jobs around. So that's what we did. The following day, we didn't do anything in the morning. We just got on the phone, sent emails, everything else. And we pulled in quite a few projects that we didn't know anything about.
Wow.
We never looked back. And that's when you really know whether you've got a really, really good business is what happens when you get some really tough times. Later times, it was all about key people, and if anybody resigned, then that was a difficult day, and we'd have to think our way through that because everybody was important. When you're in a small business, everybody's important. You can't carry passengers.
Yeah, I hear that.
And that means people leave holes. And so naive when I started, and probably still am, but I wanted to think about Earthware being a family. And the truth is, it can't be a family. It's not a family. It is a community. And the best you can do is have a community that everybody wants to be part of.
That's right.
But communities are transient, or certainly people in communities are transient. And so you have to be willing to, people have to be able to leave, and you have to be a good leader to make sure that when they do, they don't leave a big gap. So those are probably the ones that are difficult.
I love that, because I mean, again, you don't want to burn bridges with people, because obviously, you want them to leave on really, really well, and I'm a great one for helping people to leave really well. But I do love the statement around about business is not about family as well, because I mean, obviously, ultimately, we wouldn't sack our wives. Well, we want to many times, but we would. That's not going to happen, really. Or
you might say that. I'm not going to say that.
But the point is ultimately that you want people who are who have your share those values, but over a period of time, I think this is the bit that I always try and help entrepreneurs to understand, is that when you grow and your business moves forward and changes, then the skills that you require from day one are not the skills that you require when your business is 10, 15, 20 years old. And to think that people are going to last you, that there's very, very few people who have the ability and capacity and veracity to be able to morph and develop and to grow their skills over time. They will become redundant, and you've got to accept that. Great people who become great friends, and their families, their kids, and all the rest. They're going to have their time, and that leadership, like you said, able to let them go off and leave well, and leave with their head held high is super important.
What's also true is, we meant to say that about employees, but it's also true of us as leaders. We have a shelf life. There comes a point in time where we're not the right person to take it forward. We've run out of our skill set. Our talent has found its edges. Sometimes just your energy finds its edge. It's really hard running an organization. And after a while, you just get tired. You have to find ways of either recharging your batteries, or if you can't, realizing that there's a moment when you need to pass the reins on to somebody else, somebody with more.
Is that where you came? Is that where you end up reaching?
Yeah, I think
even though I've known you for some time, there's always been an exit plan in your head, eventually at some stage. But did it sort of materialize a lot quicker than you expected in terms of how you felt?
Not necessarily quicker. Once I realized that I wanted to start thinking about a time after which I wouldn't lead. We looked at lots of different models, by the way. It wasn't about selling to the highest bidder or anything. We looked at quite a lot of different ones. There's
good.
For example, go and look at employee ownership trusts. They're a really good way of handing your business on to the next generation. We went through a big, long process, and in the end, it wasn't quite right for us. Wasn't quite right. But it is a brilliant way of building generational businesses, and it's quite tax efficient as well for anybody interested. So it's well worth having a look at those models. So we didn't automatically think the answer to this is find a big company or buy us. That wasn't, looked at MBOs and all kinds of things. But in the end, I think I took a sabbatical about year 10, I think it was. Took 7 weeks off, and that really allowed me some time and space, and I'd recommend it to leaders, and also acknowledge that my brilliant leadership team were fab while I was away. It enabled me to rethink about where this business was going, and to put a plan in place to get us to a point where we would have some kind of transition, because I knew that I was getting tired. I was tired, and I was getting towards 50. I've been doing it 15 years, 16 years, and after a while, you don't have the energy. Well, I didn't have the energy to necessarily take it forward into phase 4 or phase 5 or phase 6, and I wanted to be honest with first myself and then with the rest of the team, that maybe it's time to let other people pick it up. And we had Earthware still has some great people who have their visions for where they want to take the business, and they have more energy than I do. And
Good.
The great thing about collecting a team of fabulous people is you've got a team that can take it forward, and actually it's incumbent upon you at some point to get out of the way.
There you go.
Otherwise, you become the limiting factor. So.
And in terms of that process, because I always say to organisations, and as you well know, many people come to me in the sense of at the lowest ebb, they've reached a bit of a glass ceiling. They've got the challenges of not quite sure where to go, what's in the next direction, wherever it is, and so I'm done. I want to sell, and where can I find a broker? And they ask me, if I can broker, and how can you help me to sell this business? And I say, don't sell yet, just hang on, and really help them to understand that process of when you're building a business, sort of 3 phases, or exit sort of 3 phases. You've got to ensure that the business is right, and then you've got the beauty parade, and then you've got the exit phase. Those 3 phases are super important, and most people don't appreciate they've got to get the business right first in order to get the best value out of it. So a lot of my work is helping them to create value in the business, ensuring that, like you said, you're in this position where you can exit out. You've got a great team left behind you, and it's not dependent on you, because obviously investors see through that, and that's where the evaluation gets hit, because they know that they have to have you on board, because if they don't have you on board, the business collapses overnight. So
yes, so often nowadays, if I'm ever asked, I give 2 bits of advice to owners or leadership teams that are looking for a sale. One of which I took, and one of which is me looking back and wishing I'd done it. So the first bit is, if you're the decision maker, is to know your number. So you'll never know what the right time is to sell if you don't know what you need to get out of it. So I worked with in fact, I got to know, because of the course, I got to know a wealth advisor called Alan Smith. He's
very good.
Brilliant guy, does a podcast as well. Well worth listening to Alan's stuff. But Alan was gracious enough. We did a bit of a I think it's called the Cornish economy, isn't it? So I trained some of his team in Agile, and he lent me one of his financial advisors to try and help. We went through with me and my wife.
Financial planner, very good.
What it is for the rest of our lives that we wanted to do. We're not
100%
hugely. We aren't people that want yachts or anything like that. So, and he worked it really hard for us, and at a very detailed level. And in the end, for me and Brian, he did the piece of work that we had a number, and we knew that number would allow us to live the life that we wanted to live. And so it became really easy, because after that, anything above that number was fine. Anything below that number, well, we had to have a plan B.
Yeah.
And actually, one of the things I say if you're already above your number, I'd question why you continue to run your business, because what you're doing it for, anything above that is vanity. You don't need it. So, and in fact,
what is enough? I always ask that question, people. What is enough?
It's enough. And actually, leaving some more in there for others is, once you've taken what you need out, it's a pretty reasonable thing to do. And the second thing is, if you're listening to the podcast and you're not familiar with the 3 stages of the sale process that Wayne's outlined, then obviously call Wayne. But in the second stage, you have to prepare something called an information memorandum, which outlines your business to a bunch of people you've not met, and what makes it a really saleable and attractive business.
Yeah.
So one of the bits of advice I would give is to anybody thinking of selling is, say you're thinking of 3 years' time, is write the information memorandum you want in 3 years, and write it today, and then manage your business to that information memorandum.
There you go.
What is it you want? Because I think people get really fixated about profit or EBITDA or adjusted EBITDA, and that's really important, but they forget multiples, and multiples are really important. And the EBITDA is a number that you based on your profit and your performance. That's great. But the multiple's equally important, and the multiple is a lot about other things. So how strong is your management team? What's your client? What's the distribution of your clients? What kind of technology?
All
the things that make your business magical and attractive, and mean that for instance, somebody might want to buy you because they don't want their competitor to buy you, and suddenly you start talking about things that enable you to or make your business more attractive.
Yeah.
And that's really important. So I say to people, write the information memorandum of the business you want to sell in 3 years' time, and then try and make that happen. And I wished I'd done that, but
no. It's
you only
wise
tend to do this once, so
no,
you do it on the journey.
no, absolutely wise words. Conscious of our time as well, but really I want to just double down a little bit around the whole element of the mindset and the element of faith in that mindset for you, in terms of your journey and how you've used faith not only as a means of obviously moving the business forward, but also as a means of the exit process as well. And just share a little bit about that and that journey for you.
Yeah, I think going into business with somebody who shares the same faith you do, no matter what that faith is, made the journey a lot easier. So Brian went to the same church. That's how I knew him, and that makes things a lot easier. The other thing is we didn't run a Christian organisation. We ran an organisation which had Christian values at its core.
Good.
When you look at the values that I just went through earlier, they're not, they're things that we try and live the rest of our lives by as well. And so that's really important. We were not particularly overt about that. You could have probably joined Earthware and left Earthware and may never have known that, and perhaps that was wrong. But to me, I'm much more interested in how you run it rather than what you tell people you want to run, or as what St. Francis of Assisi once said, didn't they? Preach the gospel, and if you must, use words. So I think actions are so much more important. And I know there'll be people that have worked for Earthware who, if they listen to this, would go, well, I can think of 100 ways that I think you're inconsistent with how you should have been practicing your faith out there. And they're probably right, because I'm not perfect, Brian's not perfect. Every day we get up and we make mistakes. And in the end, that was, I think, faith fueled us trying to create an organisation that ran on a set of values, but also trying to do things that would have a lasting impact beyond us. So
love it.
Sitting on a bar stool at the end of my time, I'm probably not going to, you ask me what I did, I probably won't say I built an organisation of this many people or this amount of money and I sold it. I'd probably say, wow, we built all the maps for the Torch Relay, or my personal favourite project that we ever did was we worked, and it's a product that's being used by Mental Health Trust, which is we try and identify the people at greatest risk of a crisis event. I worked with a big team to do this, it wasn't me, and try and direct the resources to them before that crisis event. I'm convinced that has saved lives. I can't prove it to you, but I'm convinced it saved lives, and that's way more important than building a business.
And that's the bit for me that I love. If there's anything out of this, folks, that you take away is that legacy piece. Because I always ask the question of leaders, what it's all about. We can have the nice fancy car, we can have the lovely holidays, but what are we creating? What we're building? What we're solving? That's going to outlast us. Because I think sometimes we want to build you've done Earthware and I'm done type of thing. No, but have you created something which is going to have an impact 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 years in the future? And for me, that legacy piece is always important. And I'm always challenging my teams, challenging myself. What am I building here? If it's just for me, like you said, it's a nonsense, but if you're making a difference to society and the world, that's something to be proud of. And that's something that, you give God thanks in that respect for many aspects. Conscious of our time, oh my gosh. It's just whizzed past, but the thing that I want to really just talk about now is what's now for Neil, and I also talk to this element of when you've exited. It's not a matter of it's that there's the whole lot of emotions, and I don't know about you, but where the element of grief came into the process as well. But people don't appreciate when you've handed down something that you've invested your life into. And your family sacrificed themselves, and blood, sweat, and tears, and tears are real stuff, within the business. And you've laying it down. The whole host of emotions get filled. Yes, you've got the nice, whatever it is, but ultimately there's a whole. Just talk into that as well, and helping people to prepare that if they are in that position, these are things that you should be thinking about as well.
Yeah, It's a difficult one. It certainly is. The phrase I use is the day after you sell, everything changes and nothing changes.
There you go.
That thing that you've built is, and you have to hand it over, because that's part of the deal. If you don't want to do that, don't sell it. You have to hand it over. You have to entrust it to somebody else. And but my kids still went to the same school the following day, still living in the same house, still had the same wife, and nothing had really changed, except to me everything had changed, but there was almost no visible evidence of that. And I think it's also, as I looked back now, it's 2.5 years since then, as I look back now, it depends what you think your legacy is. And I've come to the point where I think the legacy is the people. Earthware was an agency. Agencies, the people are their engine. It's all about the people. And those people, many of whom are still there, are still doing great work. And they will then build through. But also, everybody that was ever part of our journey, and over 100 people were part of our journey, I hope that they were built up and inspired and to go on and do them. And many of them have gone on to do some really cool things. And I'm hoping one day somebody will ring me up and they'll have built a much bigger, more successful business. And they'll have been inspired on their journey by what they saw when they were part of our story. And that would be the legacy that's really important. So that's kind of the way I look back on it. So it was emotional, but in the end, once you get through through that stuff, you can look back with pride on what you've done. What am I doing now? I don't know what I want to do in the future. Still don't know. So the way I describe it now is I'm having the gap year that I never had.
Don't make it too long. Don't make it too long.
Because otherwise people say, what are you going to do next? And it's a really difficult question, because I don't yet know, but I'm in a lucky position in that I don't have to make that decision right now. So I do lots of volunteering. I do some volunteering work. I'm still a school governor and things like that. But I'm also trying to get a decent golf handicap, and I'm playing more tennis and spending more time with my kids and coaching hockey and coaching cricket and doing a load of things that otherwise you wouldn't have had time to do. And I'm just really enjoying this. If it's a hiatus, then so be it. But it also might be a good blueprint for the rest of my life. And the lucky thing about selling a business is it gives you choices.
Gives you options. And on that note, Neil, I really do appreciate your time. And you're still a busy man. It's taken me ages to get hold of you. So clearly you haven't stopped really in terms of activities. So well done. Just keeping yourself active and busy, and more importantly involved as well in life. I always say to owners, make sure you have purpose going forward when you sell. Have things that you can invest in and spend your time, whether it's voluntary or whatever it is, but do stuff. Golf takes you so much, but you need other stuff to keep you going. So, but at the same time, there's so much more you can give. And my encouragement to you is that yes, I'm sure you'll find that other thing that you should do really to again make a difference. Always tease people and says there's a guy in the Bible called Moses, and he didn't get going until he was 80. So you're still a young man. Still getting going. So hopefully you'll find the next step going forward as well. Thank you again. Thank you to Neil as well. Just to wrap up really our time together really in relation to the sort of next phase as well. On the a little bit about us going forward, but in terms of finishing off really, you can get hold of Neil on LinkedIn. I'm sure he'll love you to be connecting as well. And if there's anything on the podcast that you wanted to share in addition, then I'm sure he'll love to chat to you about it. You can get a load of information around some of this stuff on our website. Obviously, I'm going to small plug for our book, which is on Kindle as well and Audible. 10 Commands of Business Growth. We go into that element of the exit plan aspect as well. If you want to learn more about good people like Neil and others who we have on the podcast, subscribe as well on all the social media channels from YouTube, Facebook, etc., LinkedIn. I think there's a fourth one somewhere, but I can't remember. But anyway, all the four major social media channels anyway. But appreciate your time together. Thank you, Neil. Best wishes for the future, and we look forward to seeing you shortly. Thank you.